How old were you when you joined the military?
I was 19.
So you were 19 years old. Did you enlist?
I volunteered.
Why did you volunteer?
Because I was going to be drafted. Okay, and it's a long story because I had a very good friend in high school. I played varsity football, and I was quite an athlete. I considered myself a pretty good athlete, and I was pretty well known throughout the city as being one of the top baseball players in the city. And
Which city?
Elmira, New York. Okay, and at that time, I was into athletics, and as you got to understand, my mother and father came from Sicily as immigrants at the age of 16, 17 as a family, and so I was a first generation Italian, and I grew up in an area where you had a polyglot of people. You had Russians, you had Polish, you had Jewish, and you had Italians, and so you all lived together because you kind of commiserated with each other. Okay, so that's where it all began, and the only outlet that we had was athletics, and we played a lot of baseball and so forth. So gradually, as I always had a dream that I would play varsity football in high school. And you got to remember when you're growing up in an area with 6 brothers and 4 sisters, okay, and you always had a dream that I was going to be something special. All right. So I kept that in the back, never smoked, never got involved. And the kids that I hung out with were, different types. Some were rough, some were nice, and some started to smoke at a young age. But I always stood above them, not from a standpoint of feeling better, but I always had more dreams. And as a result of it, when I finally got into high school, and at that time they had 2 schools. They had Southside and the Academy. You had about 2 different schools, and so you only picked 11 out of about 3,500 students.
Wow.
And I was one of 11, so I got to be a varsity player.
What position did you play?
I played end. Okay, and it was very competitive. So from there, and I got through high school. I was always a pretty good student, and finally, World War II came, Pearl Harbor, and all that.
So
and
did you join in 1941?
No, my brother. I had an older brother who in 1941 was drafted. Okay, and then I had another brother who was older than I, and he was also drafted into the Army. So at the time, during World War II, there were 4 of us in World War II at the same time, brothers. I had one brother had 5 battle stars. He was in the Pacific with General MacArthur. He was on the USS Mount McKinley. So he was in all of different battles and aboard that big ship. So, but as a result of it, finally came time for me. You want me to go on like this?
Yeah, you're doing just fine.
Okay, finally came time. All of a sudden, I had this good buddy, and naturally, in my family, my father had a tavern, and we lived above the tavern. Okay, so I spent a lot of time with my friend Al Millette, who eventually became a big time sports writer, and he and I were buddies. And so after school, we'd either go to the YMCA and play basketball or work out, or afterwards we'd go to his house. So I spent a lot of time there. Finally, came about the time that, we decided that we're going to go in, okay, rather than be drafted. So we decided to go to the post office, down our post office where the recruiting station was. And there was the Army, Navy, Marines, and so forth. And we were interviewed by the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and so forth. And we're kind of inclined, maybe thinking maybe it would be the Marines, okay? So but before we left, his mother said, Bernie, she says, whatever you do, don't sign any papers today. You come back home and we'll talk about it, okay, to her house. And so there were 5 of us, 5 friends. 2 went into the paratroopers. 1 went into the Army, I think it was the Army, okay? And Al and I were thinking Marines. Okay, so we went back that day, and she said, we explained everything to her, and she was like my mother, because my mother was so busy taking care of a big family that she kind of adopted me. And she said, she says, I made arrangements tomorrow morning, and she had a nice little coupe. She says, we're going to drive 60 miles to Binghamton, New York, and we're going to go to there's a Coast Guard recruiter there. We're going to check out the Coast Guard. I said, Coast Guard, what do they do? Okay, they guard the coast.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next morning, she loaded us in the car, Al and I, and we drove to Binghamton, went to a YMCA there, and there was a recruiter there, and he interviewed us, 5 or 6 other guys there, and it sounded pretty good, so we signed. We enlisted in the Coast Guard.
Awesome.
Okay.
What year was that?
1940, December of 42.
December of 42.
Okay.
So when you enlisted, what was the attitude like in Elmira towards the war, towards Germans? You have an Italian background. You're also part of the bad guys in this. What was the attitude?
That's right. Well, Elmira at that time, it was really, all of a sudden, it came to life. We had a factory there called Eclipse, and they were making bomb sights, Norton bomb sights. Okay, and I'd gotten a job there working on the assembly line after high school with Al and I, and we worked there maybe 2 or 3 months, and finally we said, we got to get out of here. Okay, nothing but women all over on the damn place. Okay, which was nice. Okay, and so we, but the attitude was unbelievable. They had 24-hour shifts. Everybody was working. They had different drives, like to get scrap metal, and I mean the atmosphere was strictly wartime. And in fact, they had me as a air raid warden. I had to go stand on the corner there during the mock air raids and so forth. And so they're all involved in the hectic part of World War II. Okay.
Were people afraid that perhaps the Germans would invade someday? Were people?
No, there's no fear of being invaded. I think there was, as far as the East Coast is concerned, because you had German submarines that came up pretty close.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but the atmosphere was very hectic and exciting.
Were people angry?
They weren't angry, they're having a good time. My father had a tavern, and these people would get paid, okay, and they'd come in, man, they're hallucinating, but they're all concerned about their children because, I know of maybe 4 or 5 guys that hung out, as I remember growing up in that neighborhood, they'd have crap games, okay, and I'd go watch these guys shoot crap in different, not restaurants, but a place where they'd hang out, pool parlors and so forth, and I'd just go in there and watch these guys shoot crap. By crap, I'm dice, and there's a lot of that heck, but a lot of those guys, I can remember their names now. They were killed. 2 were killed in North Africa. 1 was killed. So he had a lot of people concerned about dying. Okay, and
What was the church situation like there? I mean, were people going to church? Were they?
I was a Roman Catholic, and I can remember going to church because we go to church every Sunday. My father made sure of that. When you have 6 boys and 4 girls, okay. My father was a kind of a disciplinarian, and he had a strap on the back door as we walked into the house, and the strap hung there. And he pointed at that strap. You know something? He never hit one of us, but we knew the strap was there. We had to be in a certain time. The discipline was there. We had more discipline there than most families had in that neighborhood.
Wow.
And as a result, none of my brothers ever got involved with the law. And some of these guys in that neighborhood were arrested. I had to go to prison, things of that nature.
Oh, yeah.
So you had a polyglot of situations there. If you go into that, I'd be talking for another hour about my life there. So if you want me to get into the World War II end of it.
We're going to get there. So you get into the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard is one of the oldest branches of government. Alexander Hamilton was actually the guy that is responsible for starting that, right?
Well, right. So actually, it was December. So January, I get ordered. January, I think it was January 7th. I've got a history of the official history of my time in the military. I brought it with me. And so January, they get word that we've got to be at, we got to go to this camp, Manhattan Beach in New York. Okay, so Al and I say goodbye to my father, my mother. I go up to, there's a kind of a platform where the railroad would buy our house, and I was up there, so I walked up there by myself. My father, nobody came with me, and Al was there with his mother and father and the two of us. So we get on a train and we go from Elmira to New York. Yep. Okay, and we get to Hoboken, and then the train stops there, and then we get off the train, and they put us on a bus. Then we go over the Verrazano Bridge to Manhattan Beach. Colder than hell. Okay, so do you want me to go into this part of it?
No, I want to hear about this.
All right, so we go into the receiving station, and it's cold. And in the meantime, I had a nice camel hair jacket, coat on, and I was dressed real nice. And I get in this receiving station, and we had to shed all our clothes. We had to pack them, all right. And then we had to send them all home, which we did. And then they gave us GI issues, shoes, pants, whatever. And they gave us all kinds of shots. And so we were all ready. So they said, okay, you guys line up. Then we walked out, and it was kind of sleeting. And we had to walk across a whole big football field, maybe 300 yards or maybe more than that. We had to walk through that, and we were all marched in file, and we came to a street where I lived. It was 306 East Washington Avenue. This was 304. I said, wow, this is going to be something else. So we get to this place, like, it's no bigger than this room, okay? And there are bunk beds, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's like it's a little hut. And we're all wet, and we had our sea bag full of clothes and whatever. And we get in there, and it's real cold, no heat. And cold water, no hot water. Okay, there's a latrine, maybe 6 stalls, and there's a place for the petty officers, two petty officers, that were their quarters were. Mm-hmm. Then we were in bunks, and man, we stagger in there. We're cold, we're miserable, hadn't been fed, okay? And one thing, I always had a criteria that wherever I went, I'd always grab the lower bunk, because they go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I wasn't about to go up and down. So I grabbed the lower bunk, and Al, he gets the second bunk, and he's crying, okay? And I'm down there, I'm saying to myself, wow, what did I get myself into here? Well, to make a long story short, about 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, we're laying there in the bunks, and these two boatswain mate and a coxswain, they come running out. Come on, you guys, get out of those bunks, get up. You start yelling and screaming at us. So we had to file outside, and then we marched to the mess hall, big Quonset hut. Mm-hmm. And we got in there nice and warm and had all this food, okay? Well, that was the beginning of my time with the Coast Guard.
And how long did it take for, I know the basic training and everything else, how long did it take you to get to England? Take me fast forward me all the way to Overlord, in that. Okay,
now if you want me to go forward. So actually what happened, I'm in boot camp. I'm there and I'm going through, it's cold. Some guys are coming down with spinal meningitis. Some guys are coming down with pneumonia. And luckily I came down with what they call a perirectal abscess. I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden I could barely walk. And I had to walk maybe a quarter of a mile to get to sick bay. And I get to sick bay and I'm in there, and I'm standing in line. There's about 14 guys in front in the cold waiting to get in the emergency room. And they felt so sorry for him. They moved me from the back of the line all the way to the front.
Wow. And
I got in there. So they operated down and took care of that. And the corpsmen, these are the pharmacist mates, the corpsmen, they were impressed with my conversation. And they said, look, why don't you become a pharmacist mate? I said, what's that? So, you're a corpsman. I said, deal me in. Okay. So to make a long story short, He said, we're going to go to Columbia University for 3 months in April, and if you sign up now, you'll be eligible for that. So then I wound up going to Columbia University for 3 months, but prior to that, I had to work in the emergency room. When the guys that come in with spinal meningitis, I had to grab and hold them while the doctor put the spinal tap in.
Oh, wow.
I worked in the rheumatic fever ward. Guys were sick all over the place.
They taught you how to be a medic.
So yeah, I learned about taking care of people and so forth and so on. So Al, my friend, finds out what I'm doing. He said, hey, can I do it? I said, sure. So I got him in. Unfortunately, he got worked in the scarlet fever ward and got scarlet fever. Okay. Well, he never wound up going to Columbia University. So I went to Columbia University. We're there for 3 months. We had the time of our lives in New York, and we went to classes every day, but they taught us first aid, okay, medic. So that was it. I was there 3 months. After that, they had to assign us, okay? Our first assignment, as luck would have it, I think my name Trifoso, being Italian, being down the bottom of the alphabet. So I wind up on a Pullman train, first class. I'm all the way to San Diego, California, okay? And then I'm there at the Coast Guard Air Station in San Diego. So I'm there for a short period of time. Then one day, I'm in the mess hall, and there's a bulletin board there, and it says Coast Guard Preparatory Academy. They're going to take 900 kids, guys from all over the country. I nonchalantly put my service number, thinking they'd never call me. Well, 2 weeks later, I'm on a train going back across country to New London, Connecticut. Okay, so I'm there at the Coast Guard Academy, going to classes. I'm going. That's supposed to be 9 weeks, and finally, we finished that situation. They only take about out of 600. They only take maybe 5, 8, or 10 guys into the academy. So I wind up in Boston. The new assignment, and then I get there and I'm working, and I'm assigned to a sick bay in Boston, and there after that I make friends with two Irish guys, Jimmy Lynch and P.J. Barry. P.J. Barry, the beginning of the alphabet, Lynch. We got to be they were great guys, okay, and we kind of socialized, but as a result of it, one day we're sitting in the sick bay, and five corpsmen, and a doctor walks in and says, we need 3 volunteers for a special assignment. Well, 2 of the guys walk out immediately. So Jimmy Lynch and I and PJ volunteer. So then we wind up, it's called Pool 96, and we're going to go to Normandy, and we're going to go aboard ships, some kind of an assignment. So as a result of it, when we volunteer, immediately they load us on trucks. They take us to a local YMCA. At the YMCA, as soon as we go through the doors, you can't get out, okay? And we're there 3 days, about 600 guys, and we're in this gymnasium. Finally, they give us our assignments, and then they said, well, you're going to go on landing craft infantry, LCIs, and they're 153 feet long, 50 feet wide, flat bottom, and you're going to carry 200 soldiers into Normandy, well, whatever invasion is going to, but actually we're waiting for the big time deal. So as a result of it, Jimmy Lynch, he winds up on the 91. He started at 83 all the way up to 326. And P.J. Barry got on the 88. Well, Trifoso, way down the bottom of the alphabet, I wind up on a 325. Okay, so all of a sudden, we're put aboard. They got to get us to England, so they put us aboard what they call an LST, landing ship tank. It's 500 feet long, flat bottom, and it carries maybe 1,000, 2,000 troops if you needed it. Okay, big time deal. So all of a sudden we're on the LST, leaving Boston, and we go to Halifax. From there we get into the Atlantic, and while we're in the Atlantic, we get into a convoy with maybe, I'd say 45 or 50 ships, all kinds of ships, and we're being escorted by destroyers.
Well, you're worried about U-boats, right?
Yeah, U-boats. So, so then we're in a convoy. So we're on our way across the Atlantic, and they had to keep us busy. Naturally, I got seasick. I was 4 days just crawled into the bathroom back. Finally, I got over that, and so then they put me on what you call a submarine watch, where you had a radar, and we were looking, so you'd see submarines, and during the day, these destroyers would be shooting these ass cans into the water. Well, it took us about, I say, 30 days across the Atlantic, and we got to Scotland, and then we had to go from Scotland all the way to Dartmouth, England.
Yep.
And it was during the blackout when everything was blacked out. So you get on these trains, and the German planes would come over and sometimes blow up these planes. So
were you ever afraid?
I never had fear.
So you're on one of these trains, it's blacked out, you hear German aircraft bombing, and
Yeah, I for some reason or other, I was philosophical. I mean, I had an experience where I had to give first aid on the ship that hit a mine, and I was the only person that went aboard to give first aid, and there were dead people around, and I had to, one guy had a leg. I'll get into that later if you want me to, but so we're on this train. We go all the way across. We wind up in Dartmouth, England, and from there we get on a truck. They take us to a landing area, a dock, and they get us in a small boat, like a rowboat almost. And all of a sudden, I see this ship over there, and I said, "Wow!" I got pictures of that, and it was 150 feet long, 50 feet wide, flat bottom, cold, and I went aboard that. And I'll tell you, that was an experience. And if you get into a storm, you had to lash yourself to your bunk, otherwise you'd fall out. You always had the fear of falling overboard. But so that was the beginning. And we were on maneuvers prior to D-Day. And the Germans would come over to bomb England, whatever, okay? And it was but it was kind of a exciting time to be there.
Because give me the year where was the base in England that you were at?
Torquay.
And where's that?
It's a kind of a summer play, very beautiful area. Torquay overlooked the bay, and so we spent a lot of time in Torquay, Plymouth, Weymouth, okay, and they all were subjected to air raid bombings from the Germans, and I can remember walking through Plymouth at night in nothing but total devastation. Everything is down, and I had to walk all the way through it to get to my ship that was docked. Okay, so I experienced just about everything you'd want to experience.
When did you know that you were going to be part of D-Day?
Well, I knew that was it, because what you saw in England was total hectic planning, not hectic planning. I mean, you had trucks, activity. I mean, they say that there's so much American equipment there that England could have sunk into the sea. It was so loaded, okay? And so the preparatory work, and then you had Army, Navy personnel wandering all over England, and there was no food. I mean, you go to restaurants and all you got was imitation stuff. But we got to socialize and meet some of the local women and whatever. It was an experience. Looking back on it, it was exciting.
When did someone tell you? When did your superiors tell you, look, here we go, Bernie, we're getting on this ship and we're going across and we're going to invade?
Well, I'll tell you about one incident before. We'd go have maneuvers where you'd have LSTs and LCIs and destroyer. And we'd have mock landings where you practice. Okay. Well, this one time we're sitting there, a place called Sandhurst. I mean, and if you want to read a book that gives you a total history of World War II, is read Stephen Ambrose's D-Day.
I read it. It's a great book.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Well, actually, it brings out. I was there that night when these German E-boats slipped in. The German Ebers were torpedo boats. They slipped in and they sunk 2 LSTs, and 750 soldiers and sailors lost their lives. Okay? So you can see what we're coming up against. So actually, we knew that we were going to be there in Normandy. And they anticipated that LCIs, maybe as many as 75 to 80% of them would not survive any landing. Well, I'm going to speed this up now. So we knew that this was going to take place. So on June 4th, the skipper got us into the cruise quarters, and he says, and he had this proclamation from Eisenhower saying that D-Day, Overlord, is going to be the next couple of days. Okay, well, and they had masses up on the deck, on the piers, where these priests were there and they're giving mass. And I got pictures of us all being around there at mass, getting communion and getting ready for, and there were soldiers and sailors, and a lot of those guys probably died later on. Okay, so on June 4th, you had to see the activity of the trucks zipping by with all kinds of, and you had 8 or 10 or 15 of these LSTs with their bows down, and trucks would drive into them and leave stuff there and pull. It was just hectic, like you cannot believe they're getting ready for D-Day. Okay, so they're loading everything all up. So about that time, 4 trucks came, and 200 soldiers piled off, and they piled into our ship. And I got to watch these guys for 2 days, okay, and they were young guys like us, 19, 20 years of age. And so, they were experienced, and not one of them was crying or showing any type of emotion or any fear, okay. And I got to talk with them. They were writing letters, and they were, smoking cigarettes and just contemplating keeping themselves. And so on June 5th, word came that we're on our way into Normandy. So we go into the channel, and they called it off. Okay, Eisenhower called it off because of the weather.
Weather is bad.
So then June 6th, that arrived. Okay, I had my first aid bag. I was the only medic aboard ship, and these 200 soldiers. There were 4 compartments. You had 50 soldiers in each compartment. Mm-hmm. Okay, and my friend Jimmy Lynch, he's on the 91, and Jimmy and PJ Barry was on the 88. So all of a sudden we're going into the channel. It was cold, miserable, kind of a drizzle, and the waves were about 5 foot high, and we're into it. And all those sailors, those soldiers were seasick. Have you ever been seasick? You know what it's like, okay? And when you're seasick, you got a 60-pound pack on your back, and you're miserable, and you're throwing up, okay? And then we go into the channel, and let's say there are 5,400 ships, 12,000 airplanes, 175,000 soldiers, sailors, and Marines. I was one of the 175,000. And I'm, at that time, a 3rd-class petty officer. Okay, a pharmacist mate. You come 3rd class, 2nd class, 1st class. So I'm there, so we're into the channel. And Ernie Pyle, you probably remember that name, he took a picture of the Coast Guard ships in a file as we're on our way. And it was really amazing. I mean, it was awe-inspiring. It really made me pretty proud, because I was always a proud guy. I was always what you call a proud American, because I love the country, and I was so proud to see it with all this panorama. And we're going across the channel, and it's pretty miserable, but there's ships, and all battleships, cruisers, destroyers, APAs, all kinds of supply ships, LSTs, LCIs, and you name it. And they're all making a beeline for Normandy. And as we get closer and closer, and it's cold and miserable, okay, we get our orders from the USS Bayfield. That was the Coast Guard headquarters ship. And so as we're going along, we get our orders in 24 ships, okay, and we're going toward Norton. There's all kinds of shell fire up ahead, all kinds of confusion in ships in all directions. And so all of a sudden 12 ships went to the left and 12 ships went to the right. Well, God was on my side. 12 ships that went to the right, I was on one of those ships, a 325, and the 12 ships started in 83, went to Normandy, Omaha, where 4,000 guys lost their lives. And my friend P.J. Barry, the 88 was the first ship to touch Omaha Beach, okay? And Jimmy Lynch, he was on 91. The 91 never left the beach. He was blown up on the beach with 200 soldiers, okay? And the 91, the 92, and the 93, and the 85, if you want to go to the internet and just go U.S. Coast Guard LCIL 91, 92, or 85, you get a real history of what happened that day. It was total hell. Some of those guys were going down the ramps and they were blown up as they were going down the ramps. And so we're on our way toward Utah Beach, okay? And as we're going toward Utah, Elliott Roosevelt, this is Teddy Roosevelt's son, okay? He was leading the way. Somehow we went off course maybe by a mile, either to the left or right, I forget now. Instead of going straight ahead, we went this way, and we missed the actual, where all the guns were, 88s and so forth. And as we're going in, going into a different part of Utah Beach, and he realized we were got to the wrong place. He said, okay, let's start the war here. But when we got there, it came for us to go into the beach. The tide was in, and and I had my first aid bag on my shoulder, and I'm out looking at this whole panorama. But you always wonder when you're going to die, okay? And I had this kind of a warm feeling that this is it, okay? I said,
You thought you were going to die?
Yeah, I'm ready to die. I mean, I wasn't panicky or anything, but I just got this kind of a sensation that, hey, wait a minute, this is getting bigger than me, okay? And I looked at all the people around me, okay, and these soldiers. Suddenly, we had these ramps that go down on each side, and the soldiers would go down the ramps into the water. And so they had to go into the water, but we had a fellow by the name of Fiore out of Buffalo. He was one of my buddies. He went ashore and he had a tow line, and he went ahead and he had a mallet and he pounded that tow line into the beach so that the guys have something to hang on to. Yeah. So as they went down the ramps, and I'm watching them and I'm saying, wow, this is really big time deal here, okay? And they go down the ramps, and these poor guys, they had full packs, 60-pound packs, cold, miserable, seasick, into the water up to their chest, and they're floundering into the beach. And they got it, some had to swim, and we finally managed to get rid of the 200. Luckily, there was shell fire all over the place, but we never got hit in any way, shape, okay? And these guys went in, and I'm saying to myself, these guys were the real heroes. To this day, I'll always look at a soldier or a Marine or whatever and say, man, that guy's a hero, because they went ahead ashore and they had to fight those Germans because they had to fight their way in. And I estimate of that 200, not many of them probably survived the first few days as they went further inland, because they had to get that port of Cherbourg, and that was very important, okay? So that was it. So we managed to back off, and there was an English LCI hit a mine, but they had a lot of help, and we managed to crawl off, and we wound up into the harbor where there were hundreds, thousands of ships all around, okay? And about that time, some few German planes came over and a bombing raid, and every ship in that harbor, you just can't imagine, started shooting up in the air. It was just like daylight. You had like, it has been stated in different articles that it was like 1,000 4th of Julys.
Wow.
So I'm watching this whole panorama, okay. So then we had our new orders. We had to go back to England and get 200 more soldiers, okay. But we had a couple of commandos who had previously been dropped in behind the lines, and they were in blackface, okay, and they were being taken back to be interrogated. And they sat in the back at the fan tail of the ship, never said a word to anybody. And we went across the English Channel, back to England. We got 200 soldiers, came back, went back and forth, bringing 200, okay. And and then you had to, I had the opportunity to go ashore one day to pick up some medical supplies. So I went ashore at Omaha Beach, and I walked up and down the beach and I looked at all these ships that were all banged up. I saw the 91, the 92, the 93, and the 85, okay, ships of my flotilla. And I walked up the hillside and looked over the whole panorama. And on the way up the hillside, there were guys still wrapped in blankets, okay, who had to be buried at a later time. There's a cemetery up there with 10,000 GIs who had lost their lives, okay, and that's still there now. If you ever go to Normandy,
I've been to Normandy.
so you saw that,
I saw
okay,
it. It's
okay.
amazing.
Well, there I am looking over this whole deal, okay, and totally amazed, and I looked at the wonder, and I just wonder at the time, and with the total love and an adoration of the American military, because you saw, I think, all types of ships. And the only thing that saved Omaha that day was there were 7 or 8 destroyers that got off the coastline, and they bombarded those pillboxes.
Yeah.
Okay, but so that was quite an experience to see that. Pardon?
What was the most disturbing thing that you saw when you were there, and something that you were just like, wow, I can't get this out of my head?
Well, the fact that to see the 91, the 90, the ships that I could have been on any one of them, okay? To see that and really, and then to realize what my fellow shipmates went through, it was very appalling, okay, in my own imagination. And in the meantime, being 19 years of age, you don't think you're going to die, but there's so much excitement, okay, that you're overwhelmed by it. And I can remember the Red Ball Express when all this equipment was coming ashore there at Normandy afterwards. But the thing that really impressed me the most was one time we were on our way to back to England to get some more soldiers, and we in the Channel. It's a beautiful night. The stars are out, the moon is out, very calm, and we're just poking along. And a German airplane came overhead and spotted us, came down, checked us out. It was a German 88. And he came down, he swooped around, and right away went to general quarters. And we had what they call 40 millimeter guns and 20 millimeter gun in position to shoot at him. He had 1 bomb left, and he dropped it and landed about 100, 200 yards from us, missed us. Then he took off because he realized that, that was it. But we got to England, and we got there, they changed our assignment, and they said we were going to escort 2 what they call landing craft tanks. And they're about 90 feet long, and they carried tanks and trucks, and it's maybe crews of maybe 15 or 20, okay? And they carried American personnel, and they're going we got these two LCTs, and we're escorting them. We're the only ship. And we're going along, and it's a miserable morning time. It's raining, miserable, and the waves are moving up and down, and the, you know, you could fall overboard on this LCI, maybe 5 feet, then you're overboard as you're walking out. So I walk out, and we're moving up and down, and I got a cup of coffee in my hand, and I never smoked or anything like that, so I had a cup of coffee. All of a sudden, this LCT that was in front of us, hit a mine, a floating mine, and a guy comes flying over the side. We put a boat over, we get him, bring him in, and I give him some brandy and whatever, and we put a blanket around him. And all of a sudden, the skipper says, "Trifoso," that's me. He said, "Get your stuff together." He says, "We're going to put you." In the meantime, the other landing craft tank came along and lashed itself, was dragging the one that hit the mine. Okay. And so it was my job to, the skipper says, "We're going to put you aboard that ship. They need first aid." So I get my first aid bag and all this stuff that I have, plasma and so forth. But I had what is called a Mary Jane splint. And I remember when I was getting training at Columbia University, Mary Jane splint. So I had this Mary Jane splint. I don't know what possessed me to bring it with me. So I took the Mary Jane splint, my first aid bag, and we came alongside, and the waves were, and it was miserable. And I had to jump from my ship onto that ship. I timed it just right. I put my gear on first, and I jumped. And I landed on her okay, but nobody came with me, no volunteers. So I'm all by myself. The first thing I see is there are 3 Navy English sailors dead from concussion. And they said, "Well, there's a man up front." Somebody said, "You got to get up front quick, there's a man dying." So I run up front, and in there's a captain laying there. The concussion had killed him. He was laying there. And then there was the this sailor, American sailor, who was one of us being escorted across. And he had a bone sticking out of his thigh and his leg. Luckily, I had that Mary Jane splint for some reason or other. I managed to get that on there, and I snapped that bone back in place. And I wrapped it all up, gave him plasma, and I think I saved his life, okay? And then they said, "Well, you got to come up forward. There's a whole bunch of other guys." So I went up forward, and the skipper, that English skipper, he was moaning. He had a head injury, but you can't give morphine if you have a head injury. I couldn't do a thing for him. Then I went down the engine room. There were guys with lacerations, and I bandaged them up. One guy had a broken arm. I managed to brace that temporarily, and I'm on there for 6 hours. This was the one that made the biggest impression on me. I'm on there for 6 hours, and we're being dragged. At any time, that ship could sink, okay? But I'm on there all by myself, and we finally get to Normandy, and a doctor and a bunch of corpsmen come aboard. They check everything else, that everything's been done. And my ship comes along, they pick me up, and they treat me like a hero. And so that was one of the experiences that I had there. But the biggest thing is every day you'd see 1,000 B-24s day bombing on their way to Germany. Then they'd come back. Some would be pretty well banged up. And then you'd see 1,000 British Labradors, Lancasters. And they would be on night raids to Germany. This went on day after day. Then we saw the buzz bombs. There was always something going on, okay? And so finally, in fact, one time they gave us leave in London. I can remember being in this hotel, and I heard these terrible explosions. Come to find out, the buzz bombs, remember the buzz? Oh, yeah. They were landing just a block from where I was. Wow. And so then I spent time in air raids. I mean, I saw London at its peak when people were those English people are the greatest people in the world because they survived some terrible ordeals, the bombings, but their attitudes, they always had a happy way about them. I can remember going into these taverns, and they'd be singing songs and whatever. I mean, they had the spirit. They had the spirit to survive. Okay.
Where were you when World War II ended?
Ended?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get into that. I wound up, so all of a sudden we get word we're going to go back to the States. I'm going to hurry this along here a little bit. We go back to the States, so we go 32 days on that LCI, flat bottom, okay, plop, plop, in storms and you name it. We get to Norfolk, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, and they give me a 30-day leave. 6 days later, I got a telegram report back to the ship. The guy who was supposed to take my place never showed up. And all my buddies, all crewmen were gone. So the officers were gone. 600 guys. I was left on the LCI. And I think somebody had a wish for me to be dead because somehow I wound up being there. And I said, he's not going to make it back. I want him somewhere else. And I know the guy that was involved. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. So I wind up, all of a sudden I go through the Panama Canal to San Diego, and we go 12,000 miles, and we wind up at Okinawa. And the very first day that we go into Okinawa, after getting there, there's a kamikaze raid going on, where the Japanese planes are coming in. But as we come into the harbor, you had to visualize, you had all these ships, like destroyers, but there were skeletons. In other words, they would be the ones that would catch the Japanese planes as they came in, and they caught hell. And there were a whole bunch of them that were banged up and destroyed. There was nothing there. Because we lost, I think, there were 3,400 Japanese kamikaze planes. Well, while we're there, I experienced 49 Japanese kamikaze raids. But that first day, a kamikaze plane was going for a big APA, a big supply ship, missed us as we were in about the third, caught the number 5th or 6th, hit one of our ships in a conning tower and blew it up. Okay, but we're there, 49 Japanese raids, and finally, that's where I was. But then the atomic bomb was dropped. Okay, I'm hurrying it now. Okay, the atomic bomb was dropped, and the first one at Hiroshima, and then they dropped the second one, and all of a sudden the war is over. Okay, and all the ships in that harbor started shooting guns up in the air, and they landed on the beach. Many Marines were killed that day on the last day of the war because of all that excitement. So that's where I was. And then the skipper says, let's go take a look at Hiroshima. So we weren't too far away from it. We cruised down there, drove around it, looked it all over. Then we went to Nagasaki. Okay.
What did you see?
Pardon?
What did you see?
I saw what you call total devastation. You could just see the, and we couldn't get up that close, but we saw enough of it to make it. But being at that time, I think I was 21. Okay. It was pretty shocking, but the point is the war was over, okay? But then we had to be, they gave us a special duty where, and this is my last conversation, where we were in this minefield. We had to clear all these mines.
Where's this at?
Somewhere, I can't think of it. It was something to do with some very important seaport. We had to get these mines all cleared off so they can get the hospital ships out. Right. Okay, so we're underway for maybe 15 days in minefields because we had a low draft and it was our job. They gave us 03 rifles, and we'd stand there all day long and shoot at these mines as they bobbed up. They would cut them loose, and we blew up maybe 30 mines, and we had about 12 ships in there. So every ship had maybe 30, 40 mines they got to blow up. And so that was an experience that we had there. And the war was over, and that's it.
What were your thoughts when the war was over?
Well, you have to understand, when you go to general quarters, maybe 50, 60 times, you know what general quarters is?
Yeah, we were getting attacked.
Yeah, so you roll out of bed,
Yeah.
you run up, you got your helmet on, and you're waiting for, and being the only medic, that was my job, and you're waiting for, and then one time we were in 2 typhoons, okay, and you probably heard of this one typhoon there at Buckner Bay where, I was right in the middle of it. We lost both anchors, and we're on their way all night long avoiding hitting other ships, and so it was really it's pretty hard. The one thing that really impressed me the most, because, growing up with a family of 6 boys and 4 girls, and you had to survive, okay, it made me kind of a survivor. I mean, things did not overwhelm me. I always seemed to have more control of my emotions, and the guys looked up to me, okay. In fact, in the Stars and Stripes, they had a slogan there, and it says, and they had it there in bold print. I don't know who the hell came up with it, but he says, if your yen for life is idle and your intention suicidal, don't try poison, try Trifoso. I don't know who did it, why it was there. Can you imagine? So actually, my poor Jimmy Lynch and PJ Berry, I never saw him. I saw him one time when we got there, saw him one time when we got together when a bunch of ships never saw him again, and that was the end of it, okay? So
It must have been tough to lose good friends like that.
yeah, I mean, but one thing about, if you look at my service record, I probably were in maybe 14 or 15 different stations. And actually, the fact that I didn't realize it when I signed up for the Coast Guard, I signed up for duration and 6. I didn't know what the hell that meant. Duration, what did that mean? I mean, I had to serve 6 months. I had enough points to be discharged 3 times, because I was in European theater, and I was in fact, I was only once home in 3 years. Okay.
Well, it's amazing that you were in both theaters. That didn't
Yeah, I was in
happen
both.
very
How
often.
many guys were in both theaters?
Very few.
And I'm saying, man, they needed me to win the war. Can you imagine? I keep saying, wait a minute. I'm in San Diego. Then to be up to current time, my daughter gets me out here to California. My wife, as you know, has Alzheimer's, and I was taking care of myself. So we wind up. She says, "Saw your house. Come on." I was at MetLife. I was a manager, and I was #1 salesman for the company for $1 Million Round Table and so forth.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty good career with MetLife, and so all of a sudden one day she says, "No," I says, "I'd love to see that Coast Guard Air Station again," and they said, "Yeah, I'll drive you there." So she drove me to San Diego from Laguna Niguel, and I go inside, and I said, I was in I was here during World War II. You were? He calls the commander, was Joe Basila. He comes out, he was in a meeting, and they find out that I was in Normandy, okay, during World War II. They don't have many guys around here from the Coast Guard.
No.
So as a result of it, they said, well, look, the Admiral's going to be here another week or 2. We invite you to come back, and the Admiral wants to meet you. So I get back 2 weeks later. There was Admiral Zhukalov. In fact, he was with Donald Trump, one of his personal guys in Washington. So we get talking, very friendly, and he takes my picture, asks me all kinds of questions, and I'm saying, wait a minute. I was just a pharmacist mate, 3rd class. I got to be a 1st class pharmacist mate. I got 2 promotions, and I got 2 Bronze Stars, okay? And I'm saying, well, this Admiral is fussing over me like, I can't believe this. So then they said, well, you got to go in the other room. There's some guys who just want to say hi. I walk in the room, there's about 150 guys sitting there, and I have to give a talk, and I'm introduced. And all of a sudden, this is on YouTube, the talk that I gave. Yeah. And I'm saying, wait a minute. I get to meet admirals, and I'm just a 3rd class petty officer. That's part of my talk there. Yeah. And so then, that is it. Then I got to meet then I'm invited to be at home plate there at Padres. I do that. Yeah. Or then all of a sudden I'm invited to go to a dinner what they call a Chamber of Commerce dinner where they're honoring the Coast Guard in San Diego, and I'm invited. My daughter and I, we wind up there. There we are sitting with Admiral Zukalov at the head table, and all of a sudden he gets up and he gives a talk. He's talking about me for 15 minutes.
Oh, cool.
I said, what the heck's going on here? Okay.
Remember you told me your brothers, did they survive the war?
Yeah, I had this brother Pete. He was on the USS Mount McKinley, yep. And he was in 5 battle stars. By that, in other words, every battle in the South Pacific, he'd be on the Mount McKinley. That's the radio ship, the most important ship of all, because the Japs would love to get that ship and knock it out. Okay, sure. But you name it, he was there. He survived it. Okay, and then I had another brother who was in the infantry, and he wound up in the Battle of the Bulge, and he had quite a record. I mean, he wound up riding on tanks.
But
they all survived, and I had another brother with. So actually, somehow we managed to survive this thing. Okay.
What do you think? Why do you think that today young people could care less about World War II or World War I? Why do people in our generation?
Well, I think the problem is, number one, they're losing sight of the fact that they got the greatest country in the world here, and they're downgrading it, and they don't realize the sacrifices that other guys have given for just to protect them, their way of life today. When you went to Normandy and saw those 10,000, they're still there. Okay, they're guys at my age at that time. Okay, they're still laying there, and unfortunately, the people today are involved with their cell phones and their track phone, with all this paraphernalia. They're involved in so much trying to survive in a modern type of generation, but they don't realize that those were the guys that made this all possible, and they lost track of it. And you got to get back and try to pick up some of that history. And unfortunately, they've lost it, and it's getting. To me, I'm political, and I don't know what you're. And I'm going to say what, but to me, I want to see this country survive, mm-hmm. And because I saw it, and the only thing I can say about me as an individual, I mean, I was fearful, but never fearful to the point where I panicked or was not concerned about doing the job. Okay, and I survived it. I don't know how. But here I am now. All of a sudden, I'm talking to you, and a week ago Thursday, I'm talking to these Knights of Columbus, and I'm saying, what's this goes on and on.
Well,
Excuse me.
The reason is what you've done is really important.
Yeah, but
very, very important.
Yeah, but you got to understand, not many guys can talk about it.
I agree.
I mean, how many guys my age will remember mm-hmm. and able to summarize and discuss it logically? And remember, I mean, I was no hero, but I was there. But I was a hero enough to get two bronze stars from the Coast Guard, okay, and also to be part of a group, awesome. and always be an orderly manner. I mean, I get good conduct and whatever. Okay, and I had good moral habits, so I didn't. One thing about me, I drank a little bit when I was in the military, but I never got intoxicated. But I watched all these guys do all their crazy things, but I always was in control of my physical nature. Okay, and that's how I survived. Okay,
awesome.
So.